Thank you very much, Sharon, and hopefully you can hear me for my short stature. All right, great. Now, thank you for including me in the discussion today. I'm really thrilled to be here, and it's probably worthwhile for me to give you a bit of context about where I'm coming from. Of course, I would first like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners on the land on which we meet today, because I would like to recognize that Indigenous ways of knowing have long understood the deep connections between land, culture, and health, and as such, I really want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. My background originally is as a landscape architect. So I've kind of come to public health a bit late in the game, but it comes from a variety of reasons. Lindsay spoke in the last presentation about language, and for me, it is about combining the language of design to the outcomes of health. When Sharon calls us on a mission to take action, my interest in this space came from a place of being frustrated in designs and creating environments that were pretty harsh for our children and trying to understand how can we build better. So the Green Print is a project that explores how the design of school grounds can be optimized to support student well-being. Because while high-quality school grounds are desirable, competing project priorities and limited budgets can often mean these spaces are last on the bucket list, a nice-to-have rather than a must-have, and despite being spaces of high use and high environmental impact. So to help schools build and fund better outdoor areas, there really is a need to demonstrate how valuable these spaces are on the environment and its users. But data in this domain is often missing, and we want to change this. So through the Green Print, we see our school grounds as really an ecosystem of opportunities. The Green Print work is to help schools get unstuck in building green schoolyards so that students have daily access to quality outdoor spaces and their associated health benefits. And I should say it's also a work in progress. We're nearly 1 year into a 2-year research project and to be launched through a summit next year in August, the launch of the Green Print Guide. Now, I should say that our work is really reliant on a co-design approach. We're engaging with a growing network of stakeholders across sectors of health, advocacy, education, built environment, and government. And this includes schoolyard designers, planners, school principals, and student users. To date, we've actually had engagement with over 1,000 stakeholders, and that's just in the last 6 months. And that's been through workshops, interviews, online conversations, and in-person activities across topics of health and well-being, gender and inclusivity, governance, and design excellence. Because really, it's through the stories of these experiences of these stakeholders that we're really gathering new knowledge to support national schoolyard conversations. And guiding us in this process are our youth co-researchers, the Green Print Youth Voices. It's a dynamic team of young adults from across Australia, which provide us with really important feedback throughout the process of this project. From South Australia to Queensland, the team is there to validate our ideas, to be present during stakeholder workshops, and to really provide us with recommendations and advice on our key research priorities. And this is us. We're a small but mighty team based here at the Health Research Institute at the University of Canberra. Myself, and I'm led by my colleagues, Hannah Richardson, who has extensive experience in community and stakeholder engagement, and Dr. Claire Manning, who has over 20 years of experience in advocacy for the arts. And we're also under the leadership of Professor Rachel Davey, Linda, and Noel Corkery. Their involvement is critical, and particularly in joining the design environment to our health outputs. And we are funded through Hort Innovation with co-investment from the Landscape Foundation of Australia and contributions from the Australian government. And so now, why does this matter? Because stories are important, and our landscapes, they're filled with them. School grounds are the canvas onto which the stories of our students' lives are played out, and it's the nooks and crannies of the school grounds where they sit, the sporting field, the sunny wall, and the rainbow bench that really gives them agency to connect, to place, to connect with each other, and really take ownership of these stories and the places that they generate. Schoolyard spaces really are the places that serve as the pressure valve to relieve the physical and mental stresses that students encounter during the school day. And we know that the outdoors does a lot of good things for us. It reduces harm by creating better environments for habitat, alleviating air and noise pollution. They provide restorative impacts in terms of reducing stress, frustration, and anger, and enhancing cognitive function, and it builds capacity. Green space mitigates heat, which encourages physical activity, promotes social cohesion, and connection with each other. Now, we see a lot of this, a lot of initiatives in terms of healing gardens. We see it in our hospitals. We see it within horticultural therapy programs, within rehabilitative centers. We see them in bush kindies, that sense of play and nature engagement. But one place which we don't see a lot of that is in our secondary schoolyards. It's vastly understudied. When the world grew quiet in 2020 with COVID, I would actually visit the empty schoolyards of our surrounding high schools, curious about the stories that I'd find there. And the landscape narratives that I saw really resonated closely to the landscapes I experienced growing up. They're places of change where pace is quite slow. These spaces are pavement, they're grass, and they're hot. And in secondary years, the programming are most often focused on the delivery of physical education, but not everybody wants to engage in sport during their break times. Now, what we know is more people choose to live in neighborhoods with small or no backyards. Quality green spaces are becoming a vital component to ensure our communities remain livable. Because of this, schoolyards really grow in importance as spaces where students can be exposed to nature. Because research demonstrates outdoor activity really helps teenagers by risk-taking, developing resilience, and social skills. And there's many reasons why schoolyard research is important and overdue. Over 4 million Australian students attend school each day. That's more than the combined population of Perth and Adelaide. Most schools have an occupant density that's much higher than the average workplace, comparable to that of prisons and commercial airplanes. And as such, the way in which schools and their surroundings are designed really has a big impact on the learning, health, and safety of its occupants. These are also places where students spend heaps of time, over 10,000 hours of their adolescence, far above those of other countries within here in Australia. And at the same time, that student mental health, as we know, is declining, and most rapidly for the 15 to 24-year-old cohort. This is also accompanied by modern-day challenges. There's contributing issues to student stress levels or pressures around like digital media and climate change. So really, through our work, we're really looking to close the gap that exists between the topic of student well-being and school design. As part of this, we've conducted over 40 interviews with Australian principals and designers, and the majority of them agree that issues of low maintenance often dominate design decisions over student well-being. We know we have resources like the National Australian Student Wellbeing Framework, which is there to provide Australian schools with guiding principles to support school communities. But this document does not inform the design guidelines and standards that shape the design, development, and delivery of our school facilities. At the same time, we know very little about how our outdoor spaces can best support the changing needs of teenagers. Such knowledge is important and needed given the developmental challenges that accompany adolescence. Because often what we see as adults in the schoolyard space can be very different to what students experience on the ground. They may be overwhelmed, right, by the noise. You may perceive some students to be unsafe. We often have girls sitting on the sidelines and guys actively participating in sport. And those who feel like they can't use this space just retreat indoors. So to really understand these experiences more thoroughly, we've really begun to launch what we call the Listening and Learning Tour over the last 6 months to try and capture some of these insights. And this has included conducting virtual workshops at the beginning of the year with that broad stakeholder group. We've then moved on to principals and teachers through interviews and workshops, and then most recently actually going on site to schools and engaging with students directly. And a lot of this is really formed by drawing on our Youth Voices team. Here you can see Finn Robinson, who is our coordinator here in Canberra, and he's actually guiding some of these research processes, drawing on their own lived experiences to kind of build their own capacity to have voices and be heard. In this case here, Finn is commanding an audience of about 40 secondary school principals, having just graduated from high school himself just last year. Some of the tools that we use have included storytelling activities to really share the ideas and experiences through the student lens. We've had principals share with us images of what they consider successful and challenging schoolyard spaces to help us understand student well-being needs. And most importantly, we're also seeing some concerning trends among the students with which we were engaging at schools. So this particular exercise is what we call an affinity mapping. So we have students identify those areas that they enjoy, shown in the green dots, areas that they don't enjoy, shown in the red dots, and areas that they'd like to improve, shown on the yellow dots. We then locate those dots, synthesize them all from a series of responses onto a single map. And this gives you an example at one case study school, the difference between year 7 and year 8. So the image on my right, it demonstrates the use of one schoolyard among a new year 7 cohort, male and female students. The female students are those indicated with the yellow circle around them. Pretty much in year 7, many of them are using the site equally at the new high school. But you move to this frame in year 8, and the female students in particular have retreated to the indoor zones. They're no longer really going as much around into the sporting activity areas. They're retreating to the canteens and to the libraries, or they're sitting on the sidelines. And these are changes that I think are concerning to us, and we want to better understand how can these spaces be designed to better meet their needs. Part of what we've been doing is also conducting an aerial inventory. And as part of this, we've been looking at geospatial imagery and actually mapping and doing audits of secondary schoolyards to better understand what currently exists. But as our youth voices have shared, we may include ball courts and sport courts and paved courtyards, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the students will use it. So to understand how we can build better, we're really piloting a series of surveys among students to really capture how do these spaces actually make them feel. Are they places of social connection? Do they feel psychologically safe? And as a way to communicate some of these decisions around land use, we're actually trying to create a series of avatars, student avatars, to help understand their stories. And so I'll leave you with one particular example. Well, I'll focus on Priya for today, who is a year 7 student. And Priya would be entering into high school just this year. Her high school, and I should share, all of this comes from direct engagement with our stakeholders, so they're real case studies. The school she's going to is a school designed for 1,000 students, but in fact, it has an enrollment of 2,000. And as a result, you have a series of about 58 demountables on site. Their current ovals are about to be lost for more school buildings to encourage more classroom space. So Priya may have come from an environment like this, a nature play-based primary school where she's active and outdoors, and then suddenly she moves into a new school where it's mostly about team sport and focus, not so much direct play equipment. And she may think to herself, where is the fun stuff? Often we see in engaging with year 7 and year 8 students, they don't quite know where to go in the schoolyard. They're figuring out as they're hitting puberty and undergoing physical changes. So a lot of the girls will tend to stay to the sidelines while the boys who are actively playing in sport courts. And so we ask a lot of the students, well, what makes that space for you? Where do you feel welcome, safe, and free to use your schoolyard spaces? And what we're finding is that in year 7, when students first start, they're pretty excited about these new spaces, but as they progress, in this chart you'll see by year 10, the boys continue to track and feel connected with their outdoor spaces, but the girls feel quite disconnected and a bit disheartened in using them. The boys report that they feel them to be more accessible and adaptable and restorative. Again, the trends that we develop during these years in high school have lifelong patterns for students to follow, so we need to build on these skills. And finally, some of the reasons behind this may be the lack of variety in that's available to students. This is demonstrated from our aerial inventory. It's mostly sport courts and ball court areas. So what might be some solutions? For Priya, we would actually suggest create some playful elements, play that's not necessarily equipment and not childish, but nature-based. It could be a circulation loop that's used for exercise rather than necessarily for sport. It could be about creating small little spaces, perfect for socializing and chatting, circular seating where they can foster socializing, have it close to buildings so they can have passive surveillance, nature to help give them spaces to downregulate, but they could always do with more shade. So ideally, we'd love to move from schoolyards that look like this to ones that are a bit more green and inviting. So thank you.